Hello, I'm Louise Jordan and welcome to this video series Discovering Florence Nightingale through Songwriting. This is the fifth and final video of the series where I explore 5 themes relating to Florence Nightingale whilst sharing 5 aspects of my songwriting practice. So far I've shared my thoughts on how to generate ideas for a song, turning ideas into lyrics and writing a catchy chorus, writing verses, and composing a melody. In this video, I'll look at some ideas for writing an accompaniment. I hope you'll enjoy this video if you're interested in Florence Nightingale and also if you're interested in writing songs. If you're working through this video series and writing your own song at the same time, you might want to pause at certain points to carry out some of the tasks that I suggest. I want to start by considering some of the reasons it might be useful to add an accompaniment to a song. Firstly, for variety. The accompaniment doesn't have to be the same throughout the song. Secondly, to add texture. Adding different instruments can help build atmosphere, create tension, dynamic range, and emotional response to the song. Genre. The music can establish the piece within a genre. For example, an acoustic instrument, like a guitar, might make the song sound more like a folk or country song. And electronic and synthetic instruments can help to identify the song easily as a piece of pop or dance music. And to enhance the meaning of the piece, adding vocal and instrumental parts to a melody can help to reflect the meaning of the lyrics. If you've started by writing the lyrics and melody for a song, you might want to consider what additional parts might suit the piece. Who are you writing for, and what might they respond to? And how could an additional part bring the song to life? Some songs may have more impact without an accompaniment. For example, I wrote the piece Timothy Daly as a ballad or story song. And I talked about this in video 3 of the series when I shared my ideas for writing verses. I decided that adding additional vocal or instrumental parts might detract from the stark reality of Timothy Daly's story. There are different options when adding vocal parts to a song. The voices could sing in unison, all singing the same melody, or they could sing in harmony, for example 3 notes above or 3 notes below the melody. The voices could sing at the same time and in the same rhythm, or at different times overlapping each other, such as in a round, like London's Burning. All of these options can create different textures, and you can use one or more different texture within the same piece. A further option with vocals is to add backing vocals, for example to highlight particular words or concepts within a song. In the song Idle Women, which I shared in video 4, I added 2 vocal harmonies to the melody during the refrain line.
There was a woman who worked as a maid, singing idly, 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 die. Her hours were long and she barely got paid, singing idly, 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 die.
I think that the vocal harmonies help to add variety to a song that's 6 verses long and the melody stays the same. I think the harmonies also help to add to the mood of the piece, which is light-hearted and pokes fun at the idea of idle women, which I think was Florence Nightingale's intention. Songwriters, you might want to pause here to consider whether you're going to add additional vocal parts to your song. A further idea for accompaniment is to add percussion. This could be very complex, adding multiple rhythms on different instruments, or it could be very straightforward with one single drum. There's something spiritual, I think, in just having voices and percussion together. And adding percussion can be useful if you're writing for multiple instruments or multiple voices, as it can help to bring everybody in time. I wrote the song Toil Women Toil as a marching song for a previous project, No Petticoats Here, which tells the stories of extraordinary women from the First World War. The song is intended to shed light on the contributions of the army of women workers of the factories during the First World War, so I decided that a snare drum was an appropriate accompaniment for the choir of women's voices. I wanted to evoke a sort of coming together of women, a sense of community for a common purpose, so I used the drum beat to try to create this sense of unity.
Toil, women, toil. If the women stop work, we lose the war. So toil, women, toil. And it's sort the boots and patch the shirts. Toil, women, toil. And pick those patches of blood and dirt. Toil, women, toil.
A practical reason for using voice and instruments alone might be the availability of instruments or instrumentalists. And I'm also a fan of drones, having a single note or perhaps a small range of different notes which are sustained underneath a complex vocal part can be very effective. I'm going to focus on how I added a single instrumental part as an accompaniment for the song Living Water, which I wrote about Florence Nightingale's work campaigning for improved sanitary conditions for people living in India. Florence Nightingale was housebound for long periods of her life due to her having contracted the infectious disease brucellosis, and she contracted this disease during the Crimean War. After her return to Britain from the Crimean War, Florence researched the causes of mortality in the British Army, and she presented her findings to the government. As well as setting up a training school for nurses at St Thomas's Hospital in London, Florence researched and wrote prolifically on a wide range of issues. Whilst visiting the Hampshire Record Office at the start of my research into her life, I found a publication entitled Life or Death in India, which Florence Nightingale had written. I was intrigued why this woman, who was apparently famous for being a nurse, had written a pamphlet which is incredibly detailed on matters such as land irrigation, drainage, and the financial cost to Britain of poor sanitary conditions in many regions across India. I soon found that Florence had spent 4 decades of her life researching and campaigning for change. Her work began with army reform and understanding the causes of mortality amongst British soldiers stationed in India to protect the empire. Florence's research into the reasons for poor health within the army led her to research the conditions in the local areas around the army barracks, and she started to understand the lives of people living under British rule in India. Poverty, disease, famine, epidemics, and the exploitation of workers by money lenders and landowners. Already an established and respected statistician, Florence began to collect and analyse data and to present her findings to the government and to the public, calling for change. I'm interested in your thoughts. Does Florence Nightingale's work inspire you or cause you to think differently? I'm astounded by Florence Nightingale's dedication over 40 years to keep empowering herself to speak out by researching facts and finding out about how other people lived, and the way that she used her contacts, who were authors, politicians, journalists and academics, to gain traction for the reforms that she believed were necessary. And she did most of this work from her home. I look at Florence Nightingale as a global citizen who challenged abuses of power and made change happen. Florence's work inspires me to find facts rather than trusting other people's opinions, and to base my views on evidence. Florence Nightingale also inspires me to want to understand better the impact of globalisation, and also to take greater responsibility for the effects of my choices on other people, for example when buying products made abroad. In the report that I found at the Hampshire Record Office, Florence uses the phrase living water as she outlines the benefits of making running water available to people living across India. In another of her papers, Florence Nightingale begins, "We do not care for the people of India," as she condemns the lack of action to put corrective measures in place. I've used and adapted some of Florence's words in this song.
We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. How can we judge the value of a person if our first thought is what we get in return? We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. Should we not rise up as people for every person to have power of their own? We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand.
When I thought about the overall sound I wanted to create with Living Water, I decided I wanted to have some tie-in or connection to traditional Indian music. One element of traditional Indian music is the tala, which is a repeated rhythmic pattern often played by a tabla, a two-toned drum. As a solo performer, I couldn't have both a percussion and another accompanying instrument, so I decided to make the two-toned rhythmic part of the piano accompaniment. This repeated motif in the right hand is played throughout the piece, which was entirely composed around it. It's the central musical thread and continues throughout the instrumental, with the right hand playing other notes around it. I wanted the words that I'd taken and adapted from Florence's writing to be reflected in the musical accompaniment of the song. For example, the idea of water flowing and giving life to crops and greater freedom of movement to people. So that idea translated into a smooth, lilting left-hand melody during the introduction. When the vocal enters, I wanted the left-hand piano part to become more simple in order to place the focus on the lyrics, and also to offer greater scope to develop the piece and build the texture, to draw the listener in emotionally. I was told when I was younger that it's wrong to compose a piece that uses open fifths. That's a part that moves in parallel fifths. However, I enjoy breaking the rules. Another unspoken rule, which I think is open to being broken, is where you place the melody within the sonic range of the piece. On a piano, the melody tends to be played in the right hand, whilst the left hand adds the chord structure underneath. In a band setup, the bass guitar usually highlights the chord progression, whilst the electric guitar might play the lead or the melody, and the acoustic guitar adds the rhythm in between. However, I'd suggest that's totally open to change. Another way to free yourself from any patterns or routines that you might have fallen into is to compose a piece using an instrument that you're not familiar with. because this will force you to find new ways of writing. I really enjoy listening to music which brings together different aspects of different styles and ways of playing and different genres. The cross-fertilisation of ideas can lead to a really unique and interesting composition. In contrast with the accompaniment for Living Water, the accompaniment for Pedestal, the song which I shared in the previous video, is much more straightforward. It's a protest song, and I wanted to use a very repetitive accompaniment to echo the repetition of the lyrics, and also the repetitive cycle through which Florence's memory is used and reused, as well as the cycle of gossip about Florence which continues to be spread around and around. The loud bass note and the steady rhythm contrast with the lyrical piano part for Living Water. Living Water carries a heavy emotional message, and I wanted to give the listener some time to process that during an instrumental section, allowing the lyrical content to sink in. To add more texture on the recording of Living Water and to evoke empathy, I added some simple, sustained cello parts alongside the piano, which also aim to emphasise the idea of flowing water. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed finding out about some of Florence Nightingale's work in India, and I hope you found these ideas for writing an accompaniment for a song useful in some way. I've really enjoyed sharing different aspects of my songwriting process with you. In reality, my process tends to be a jumble of these 5 steps, and every song is written differently. The single most important part of writing for me is staying true to the inspiration behind the song. The songs I'm most proud of are the ones that keep the message behind the song at its core.